Alright, this is Deuteronomy 24 in the Prager Rational Bible. Let's begin. Alright, one starts off with an essay about divorce. Verse 1. A man takes a wife and possesses her. She fails to please him because he finds something obnoxious about her, and he writes her a bill of divorcement, hands it to her, and sends her away from his house. So, can a person divorce for any reason? Alright, this is a long essay. Possesses her is a unique translation. None of the 27 other English language translations I've consulted uses it. Virtually every translation says marries her, but that renders the phrase, he took a wife or a woman and married her, redundant. So what does took her tell us that married her does not tell us? I believe the clearest rendition is, a man takes a wife and consummates the marriage. As regards something obnoxious about her, the Hebrew is difficult to translate. Almost all translations use the word unseemly or unclean. Richard Elliott Friedman translates it this way, found an exposure of something in her. But exposure is even less clear to the English-speaking ears than the other translations, so we need to explain it. In the Torah, the term used here for exposure, irva, usually has a sexual connotation. However, as the phrase irvat devar, exposure of something, appears only one other time in the Torah, Deuteronomy 23:15, it may well imply what it implies there, something unappealing, not necessarily something related to sex. Here, it may imply something unappealing in the sexual realm, since it indicates the following words, since it immediately follows the words, he consummated the marriage. However, the rabbis of the Talmud assumed exposure of something meant anything that displeased the husband. And that view would seem to echo the Torah, which lists no reasons as being necessary to allow for divorce. And the view of the Torah and later Judaism is that divorce is a tragedy, but one that is sometimes necessary. And I will offer a personal story to illustrate this point. Just as a Jew might have a Jewish marriage in order to be considered married, it must have a Jewish marriage in order to be considered married, he or she must arrange a Jewish divorce, a get, in order to be considered divorce. A secular divorce is not enough. A get must be given by a husband under the direction of a Jewish law court, bedin. And I once spoke to the rabbi who headed the Los Angeles bedin, an older bearded man who grew up in Eastern Europe, and he was what is often termed ultra-Orthodox, and I suggested to him that it must be difficult being the head of the bedin in Los Angeles, a city where there are so many divorces, but his response surprised me. The truth is that there should have been many more divorces in the old country. That such an observant Jew, an Orthodox rabbi from Eastern Europe, the old country, no less, would say such a thing that exemplified the Jewish view of divorce. Of course, not all religious Jews have had as accepting a view as this rabbi. In any event, the Torah is not describing necessary grounds for divorce. The first 4 verses of this chapter concern only 2 issues. One is a ban on a man remarrying the woman he divorced, who has subsequently married another man and has again become single due to either the second husband's death or a second divorce. And the other issue addressed in these verses is the need for a man to go through legal channels before divorcing, something quite revolutionary for its time and even later, given that men in many cultures could divorce their wife by oral declaration alone. There is, nevertheless, much to be learned about the Torah's view of divorce from these verses, the only verses in the Torah that discuss divorce. And the first thing we can infer is that the Torah regarded divorce as tragic but inevitable, as a tragic but inevitable aspect of life. As Rabbi Elazar put it in the Talmud, if a man divorces his first wife, even the altar sheds tears. Many necessary things are tragic. Amputating a deceased limb is tragic, but sometimes necessary. Going to war is tragic, but sometimes necessary. As the prophet Malachi says, "For I, God, hate sending away a woman in divorce." But God also hates taking human life, yet he supports both the death penalty and war under morally acceptable circumstances. Yeah, just like divorce, he hates divorce, but it's only tolerated under morally acceptable circumstances, which I'm about to get to here. And many Christian readers might find this approach to divorce problematic. Well, if it goes against what Jesus says, which I'm about to get to. The New Testament holds that divorce is rarely allowable. In Jesus' words, "I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for immorality and marries another woman commits adultery." Matthew 19:9. And the Greek word translated as immorality, porneia, is the word from which we get pornography. It means essentially any sexual sin. Jesus' view of when divorce is permitted is actually similar to the position of a major Talmudic figure, Rabbi Shammai, who lived in the decades preceding Jesus, who also held that divorce is allowed only in instances of unchastity. His opinion was, however, a minority opinion, and it never became Jewish law, which has never placed restrictions on reasons for divorcing. And Jewish law, reflecting on how the majority of rabbis understood these verses in the Torah, allows divorce for any reason. Neither spouse had to commit adultery to justify a divorce, and the Jewish law might be summarized in this way: a bad marriage is a form of imprisonment, and life imprisonment should be reserved for the worst imaginable crimes. And the challenge to the Jewish view is that there will always be people who will divorce for what outsiders might deem trivial reasons. Therefore, too many people who should not divorce will do so, with all the ensuing pain and chaos, especially if children are involved. So the challenge to the Christian view is that too many people, often decent people, will be trapped in a life of pain, which with the possibility of a fulfilling marriage permanently denied to them. And should abused spouses have to wait for their abuser to commit adultery, and should abused spouses have to wait for their abuser to commit adultery or die to be free to marry someone else? Now, for the record, let me say this. God does not want you to be abused in a relationship. So, yeah, the wife is supposed to submit to the husband, but the husband is supposed to love the wife as Christ loved the church. That is what's supposed to happen. And anything short of that is sinful. All right. Now, if there's no evidence of sexual sin on the part of the spouse in the relationship, then probably you could, separate, I would say. Yeah, you shouldn't stay in the house with somebody that's abusive, obviously. And, I have kind of wondered, would sexual abuse, would that count as sexual immorality? Would that be permissible for divorce according to Jesus' words with sexual abuse and all that? Would that count? Probably, maybe, I don't know. So, give me your thoughts on that. Alright, but anyway. But as for the argument that the people divorce too easily, I will recount a dialogue in my in my early days of radio when I was the moderator of a weekly radio show called Religion on the Line that featured a Protestant minister, a Roman Catholic, priest, a rabbi, different ones each week. And on one of those shows, I asked them to offer a personal view and that of their religion on divorce. And each clergyman spoke about the tragedy of divorce and ended with a statement about how easily people divorce. I then asked each one the same question, and I began with the rabbi. Rabbi, I asked, do you know anyone well who divorced? In fact, my parents divorced, he responded. Did they divorce too easily? Not at all, he responded. There was no question they had to. I then turned to the Catholic priest. Father, do you know anyone well who divorced? Well, as it happens, he responded, my mother divorced my father. And did she divorce too easily? I asked. And then he said, I think it saved her life. And finally, I addressed the Protestant minister. Pastor, do you know anyone well who divorced? As it happens, he responded, my brother's going through a divorce right now. Is he divorcing too easily? Actually, they have worked very hard to keep their marriage intact. My brother and his wife have gone to marital therapy for years. And the moral of this story is obvious. It is often said that people who divorce too easily, but it's often said that people divorce too easily. But when it comes to divorced people whom we actually know, that is rarely the case. Some famous actors and actresses seem to both marry and get divorced cavalierly. But for most people, divorce is awful and often and rarely embarked on without great angst. And the only thing more difficult than a divorce is a bad marriage, which of course is why most people divorce. And really the ultimate way that you can actually have a pretty good marriage is if you put God and His Word at the center of it. I mean, that is really the only way you can have a good marriage. It's not going to be a perfect one, but really if you want to have a good, marriage, you need to have God at the center, ultimately. And you need to put your selfishness aside, because that's probably the big reason why you have bad marriages. Sometimes, you marry somebody that you shouldn't have married also. That could be a reason. Or it's because you're selfish, or the other person is selfish and they're not willing to put their selfishness aside. So, and that can cause, bad marriages. So, and you have the call in the New Testament to put that aside. You are to love your spouse, and you are to put, God primarily first. And if you put God first, then you're going to put your spouse first. Yeah. And you need to not put yourself first. Easier said than done, but that probably would solve a lot of the issues if you would, do something like that. Sad but true, but then what do I know? I've never been married. I'm only saying this because I've just learned it. But, not from experience, but if I do get married, hopefully I'll actually learn this and put it into action. Alright. Can only a man initiate a divorce? While the New Testament view of divorce that it's permissible only when there's sexual infidelity is a challenge to many modern Christians. Well, maybe so, but that's what's the only permissible option. It's a challenge to many modern Christians. Jewish law has presented its own challenge to Jews, and not only modern Jews. Judaism placed no restrictions on a right to divorce, but the right to file for a divorce was restricted to husbands. If a wife objected to her husband's desire for divorce, her husband could nevertheless divorce her. But if a man objected to his wife's desire for a divorce, she could not divorce him. So why did Jewish law legislate this way? Because the rabbis understood the words in this verse, a man takes a wife, to mean that since it is the man who initiates a marriage, only the man can end a marriage. And they also read the words, and he writes her a bill of divorcement, to mean that only he can write a bill of divorce, since nowhere in the Torah is a wife's writing such a bill mentioned. And Joel Alperson, the individual who organized the Rational Bible Project and also an Orthodox Jew, takes issue with this logic, drawing on his career in business. The logic escapes me here, that that would be like saying if someone initiates an offer to another businessman to enter into a business partnership together, and they do so, it would only be the person who made the initial offer who could terminate the partnership. And religious Jews have long acknowledged that the inability of a woman to receive a get, a bill of divorcement, if her husband refused to give one, has led to much unjust suffering on the part of women. And therefore, rabbis long ago adopted procedures to force a I don't know if I'm going to be able to say this, to force recalcitrant, however you say that, husband, to give a wife a divorce if she wanted one. And men who refused could be ostracized from the community, forced out of business, and even imprisoned. At this time, at least one major Orthodox Jewish journal publishes the names of men who refused to give their wives a get. When Jewish courts governed Jewish life, Jewish law called for the whipping of that type of husband that I can't pronounce until he said, "I want to give a get." After all the efforts were made, however, and the husband still did not agree to give his wife a get, she became an aguna, a chained woman who could not remarry since she remained legally married to her first husband. And another attempt at a solution was initiated in the 11th century by Rabbi Gershom, who made what has become a universally accepted ruling that a woman could not be divorced against her will. And this was a major step forward in achieving male-female equality in divorce, not equity. But, as with most attempts to enforce equality, it managed not to resolve the problem, but only to equalize the pain. It resulted in there being agunim, which is chained men, as well as agnot, as there are instances when women refuse to accept a get, leaving their husbands unable to remarry. In the modern era, other proposals have been offered to help remedy the situation. One involves the husband's signing a prenuptial agreement stipulating that in the event of a civil divorce, he will grant his wife a get. And this has reduced the number of agunot. However, not every marriage has such a prenuptial agreement, and even in marriages that do, there are men who violate the prenuptial agreement. And moreover, not all Orthodox rabbis accept such a prenuptial agreement as valid. And the only real solution is to enable both men and women to religiously divorce even when one party refuses. This, I believe, is in keeping with the spirit of Rabbi Gershom's departure from tradition ruling. But the understanding that the Torah does not allow a wife to file for divorce prevents traditional rabbis from doing so. And the question is therefore whether this Torah verse clearly implies that only a husband can file for divorce. And we need to remember that the purpose of the first 4 verses of this chapter, the only verses in the Torah that discuss divorce, is not to delineate the details of divorce law. It's to prohibit a man and a woman who have divorced from ever remarrying one another if the woman's second husband dies, or if he or she divorces. If he or she divorced. Also, to the extent that the that the divorce law is taught in these verses, this verse asserts that a man must write a legal bill of divorce in order to be allowed to divorce his wife. He cannot do what men the world over usually did. I don't know if that's a typo or something. I don't know. Simply evict his wife from their house. And the Israelite man was to understand that he had legal obligations to the woman he was divorcing. That's what the bill of divorcement is about. It also served to prevent a man from banishing his wife on the spur of the moment. Forcing him to go through a legal process meant he would have time to calmly reconsider his decision. In other words, the purpose of this verse is to protect women. So then, was the Torah's silence on a woman's ability to divorce that R word husband that I can't say a clear statement that she could not do so? Or did the Torah leave this question in the hands of later adjudicators of Jewish law to decide what to do based on their understanding of the Torah's intentions? I don't know. Alright, moving on. A man may not remarry the woman he divorced if she remarries and is widowed or divorced. Verse 2. She leaves his household and becomes the wife of another man. 3. And then this latter man rejects her, writes her a bill of divorcement, hands it to her, and sends her away from his house, or the man who married her dies. 4. Then the first husband who divorced her shall not take her to wife again, since she has been defiled, for that would be abhorrent to the Lord. You must not bring sin upon the land that the Lord your God has given you as a heritage. The man and woman who divorced could not remarry should the wife's second marriage end. The Torah's only stated reason is she has been defiled. And some scholars interpret the words she has been defiled as a reproof to the husband. By divorcing her, he has forced her to seek marriage to and the bed of another man for protection and economic support. And another reason some scholars have offered for this law is it seeks to inhibit men from divorcing. And this law makes a man understand that once he divorces his wife and she remarries, it's permanent. He can never be with her again. Hertz quotes the German Bible scholar Edward Koenig, however you say that, 1846 to 1936, who wrote in his commentary to Deuteronomy, "Women is a moral personality, not a thing that a man hands over to another and then takes back again at his pleasure." Alright, verse 5. A man is obligated to make his bride happy. Yet when a man has taken a bride, he shall not go out with the army or be assigned to it for any purpose. He shall be exempt 1 year for the sake of his household, to give happiness to the woman he has married. And the previous verses deal with the man divorcing his wife. And this verse deals with a man giving happiness to his wife. And they are obviously related. The Torah wants to make divorce as rare as possible. Yeah, because God designed marriage and he wants it to be for life. And it knows, as husbands have known since marriage was instituted, happy wife, happy life. For the record, I have coined a related adage about marriage. Relational spouse, happy house. Oh, sorry. Well, rational spouse, happy house. Sorry. Significantly, given the Torah's emphasis on family and having children, it does not say that a man should stay home during the first year of marriage in order to start a family. It speaks only of his wife and his marriage. However, this law also serves to help the husband and wife start a family by seeking to prevent the premature death of the husband in battle. Alright, moving on. Preserving a borrower's dignity. Verse 6. A hand mill or an upper stone shall not be taken in pawn, for that would be someone's life in pawn. Now the word translated here as pawn, shoval, is translated as pledge, meaning collateral, in virtually every English translation since the King James Version. And this verse prohibits a lender from taking as collateral an item a borrower relies on for his livelihood or for preparing food. And Grisanti explains it was common practice in the ancient Near East for a lender to receive something as collateral when providing a loan. In biblical times, most people who took a loan did so only because they faced difficult circumstances and were needy. Such people would have little value to offer to the lender. In this law, while not denying the legitimate stake of the lender in the loan's payment, it prohibits the lender from taking collateral that was central to the borrower's ability to make a living. And the Torah is preoccupied with preserving human dignity. See, for example, verses 10 through 11 below and in Deuteronomy 21:23. Check out that in the Deuteronomy 21 video. In this verse, the Torah is concerned that no one be deprived of the basic necessities of a livelihood and be reduced to begging. And this concern for human dignity pervades the Torah from the beginning of Genesis, when God made clothing for Adam and Eve, Genesis 3:21, through the end when God takes care of the burial of Moses, Deuteronomy 34:5 through 6. And this preoccupation continued through later Judaism, and the Talmud established a well-known principle. Anyone who humiliates his fellow in public, it is as if he has shed his blood. Alright, a ban on kidnapping people to sell as slaves. Verse 7. If a man is found to have kidnapped a fellow Israelite, enslaving him or selling him, that kidnapper shall die. Thus you will sweep out evil from your midst. In the modern world, kidnapping is most frequently carried out to secure a ransom for a kidnapped person's family. In the past, the primary purpose of kidnapping was either to personally enslave the victim or sell him into slavery. And by punishing kidnapping with a death sentence, the Torah has made clear its abhorrence of such a practice and implicitly of slavery in general. Kidnapping was the basis of the African slave trade, whether by Western or Muslim nations. Given that this verse in the 8th commandment, do not steal, prohibit both kidnapping, those who defended slavery in the 18th or 19th centuries, by appealing to the Bible, either misinterpreted or deliberately distorted the Bible. Those verses probably that say slaves submit to your masters and all that in order to justify slavery, I would say that they would be distorting them. So the Christians who were doing that in the South, right before the Civil War and all that, they were wrong. They were defending sin. Alright. And these verses here specifies the kidnapping of an Israelite. But Exodus 21:16 makes it clear that the punishment for kidnapping any person, Israelite or non-Israelite, with the intention of selling him into slavery was death. According to the Bible, then, if anyone involved in kidnapping Africans to sell as slaves was deserving of a death sentence. And this law states a principle that, had it been observed, it would have changed human history for the better. Anyone who kidnaps anyone for the purpose of slavery shall die. And if only that was applied sooner in America, you probably wouldn't have had as big of an issue with slavery, and it probably would have been abolished a lot sooner. So, I don't know. Maybe. Yeah. But eventually you got there. Alright, and then verses 8 and 9. Remember what God did to Miriam. The importance of memory. So verse 8, in the cases of a skin affliction, be most careful to do exactly as the Levitical priests instruct you. Take care to do as I have commanded them. Verse 9, remember what the Lord your God did to Miriam on the journey after you left Egypt. So the Hebrew word zarat, however you say that, has often been translated as leprosy, but that is not accurate. It is correctly translated here as skin affliction. Now, we do not know exactly the nature of this skin disease, but whatever it was, as Moses now reminded the Israelites, God afflicted Miriam, Moses' sister, with it after she and Aaron spoke negatively about Moses in Numbers 12. Moses did not intend to defame his sister, who after all saved his life whenever he was an infant, but he wanted to underscore that anyone could be afflicted by God, even Miriam, a prophetess and the sister of Moses. And this is one of the 6 commandments in the Torah commanding remembrance. Here's one of the, here are some of the 6 commanding remembrance here. Remembrance. 1. Remember the Sabbath day and to keep it holy. Exodus 20 verse 8. 2. Take utmost care and watch yourselves, scrupulously, however you say that, so you do not forget the things that you saw with your own eyes, and so that they do not fade from your mind as long as you live. Deuteronomy 4:9. Remember, never forget how you provoked the Lord your God to anger in the wilderness, from the day that you left the land of Egypt until you reached this place. You have continued defiant towards the Lord. Deuteronomy 9:7. 4. Jews are not to eat unleavened bread for 7 days of Passover, so that you may remember the day of your departure from the land of Egypt as long as you live. Deuteronomy 6:16-13. 5. Remember what the Lord your God did to Miriam on the journey after you left Egypt. This verse right here, 24:9. And 6. Remember what Amalek did to you on the journey after you left Egypt. How, undeterred by fear of God, he surprised you on the march when you were famished and weary, and cut down all the stranglers in your rear. Deuteronomy 25:17-18. It is impossible to overstate the importance of remembering. As the Spanish-American philosopher George Santayana, 1863 to 1952, famously expressed it, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. With knowledge of history at an all-time low in America, and probably many other Western countries, in 2011, the New York Times reported, American students are less proficient in their nation's history than in any other subject. One can indeed expect the errors and evils of the past to be repeated, and things got worse after 2011. Oh, yeah. And probably the big thing that can get repeated ultimately and could happen here, and it's increasingly happening here, is the evil of communism, which is what the left is all about. They want communism. And that has killed billions of people in the 20th century, and it still does. Yep. Horrible. And sadly, we're not really taught about it. I wasn't really taught about it in school, sadly. Should have been. Yep. And I still don't know a whole lot. But anyway, but at least Prager's kind of helping with that. So, all right, a man's home, even the home of a poor man in debt, is sacrosanct. Verse 10. When you make a loan of any sort to your countryman, you must not enter his house to seize his pledge. 11. You must remain outside while the man to whom you made the loan brings the pledge out to you. Once again, the Torah lays down a law to safeguard another person's dignity. This time it's a borrower's dignity, which is protected by his own of privacy in his home. Though the lender has great power over a borrower, the Torah prohibits a lender from entering the borrower's house to demand his money back. He must await his payment outside the borrower's house. As the Scottish Bible scholar Adam C. Welch, 1864 to 1943, wrote, every Israelite, however poor, has the right to invite into or exclude from the four walls of the cabin he calls his home. 3,000 years ago, the Torah essentially established a well-known saying that goes, the saying goes, as the well-known saying goes, that a man's home is his castle, even the home of a man in debt. All right. You may not take advantage of a borrower. Verse 12. If he is a needy man, you shall not go to sleep in his pledge. 13. You must return the pledge to him at sundown, that he may keep his cloth and bless you. It will be to your merit before the Lord your God. The Torah here is speaking about a person who was so poor, he apparently has only one set of night clothing, and the lender cannot withhold from the borrower anything that the borrower needs for his survival or his dignity. All right, you may not abuse your worker, Jew or non-Jew. 14. You shall not abuse a needy and destitute laborer, whether a fellow countryman or a stranger in one of the communities of your land. So regarding the treatment of workers, the Torah does not allow Israelites to distinguish between Israelites and non-Israelites. I wonder if there's anything, analytic, I wonder if there's anything, analogous, however you say that. If there's any analogous law in all of the ancient world. Yeah. You may not delay payment to your workers. 15. You must pay him his wages on the same day before the sun sets, for he is needy and he urgently depends on it. Else he will cry out to the Lord against you, and you will incur guilt. And this is Moses' restatement of Leviticus 19:13. The wages of a laborer shall not remain with you until morning. Laborers were to be paid what they were owed at the end of each day. In modern times, when workers are not paid daily, employers will be similarly prohibited from delaying payment. Well, now usually you get paid weekly or every other week or in the month. And the law demands that employers pay wages on time, no matter how frequently they are paid. In addition to the financial impropriety of not paying on time, withholding wages robs workers of their dignity because it forces them to grovel for money that they have rightly earned. And the son of the rabbinic scholar, the Shephes Chaim, 1838 to 1933, recalled that a man once saw his father run down a street just before the onset of the Sabbath. Since it was almost about time to light the Sabbath candles, he wondered where Shavetz Chaim was going at such a late hour. And afterward he found out that one of the workers at the printing press that was preparing to publish one of the rabbi's books left the shop there before Chaim had paid him. And the Chaffetz Chaim found his address and ran to his home to pay him before Shabbat so that he would not violate the prohibition against not paying wages on time. Okay, that's nice. Essay. Neither children nor parents may be punished for the other's crimes. Parents shall not be put to death for children, nor children be put to death for parents. A person shall be put to death only for his own crime. All right, and this law was unprecedented in the ancient Near East, where members of a guilty party's family were often punished along with or even instead of the guilty party, and each person is to be held responsible for his own behavior. In Babylonian law, in the Code of Hammurabi, for example, if through negligent construction a house collapsed and a child was killed, it was not the builder of the house, but the child of the builder who was to be put to death, a son for a son or a daughter for a daughter. So I guess his own version of eye for an eye, which probably would not be fitting the biblical version, which is all about justice. So I would say not good here. Alright, and then Tege notes that no explicit prohibition of such a practice is known prior to Deuteronomy. And then a later biblical book relates the story of King Amaziah, 803 to 759 BC, of Judah, whose father Joash was assassinated by two of his courtiers. It took years for Amaziah to consolidate his power, at which time he executed his father's assassins, but he did not put their children to death, for he acted in accordance with what was written in the Torah and the book of Moses, where the Lord commanded parents should not be put to death for children, nor children be put to death for the parents. A person shall be put to death only for his own crime. 2 Chronicles 25, 3-4. Even though civilized countries, largely as a result of the influence of the Torah, no longer punish family members for the sins of other family members, there is an important lesson in this law that is relevant today. It makes it clear that people are responsible for their own actions. And this is not universally accepted. It is very tempting, for example, to blame parents if their child is a criminal. But the older the child, the less we should do. By a certain age, we expect individuals to know right from wrong. Certainly with regard to basic moral principles such as theft and murder. Yeah, well, God has written the basic moral principles of His law on men's hearts. In any event, there are too many good people who have had awful parents and too many awful individuals who had decent parents to hold parents responsible for the behavior of their adult children. And one dramatic example in the Torah is that the daughter of Pharaoh, the Egyptian king who decreed all newborn male Hebrews be drowned, This woman saved the life of a Hebrew baby named Moses, and it would be hard to imagine a more dramatic example of a child who abandoned a parent's evil ways. And a later biblical example involved King Josiah, of whom the biblical records say that there was no king like him who ever turned back to the Lord with all of his heart, soul, and might. Yet Josiah's father was Ammon, a king who worshipped idols, one of the most serious sins in the Bible could ever attribute to a Jew, let alone a Jewish king. Yeah, Ammon was probably one of the worst of the worst. Well, he didn't last very long. Yep. And then Josiah's grandfather was King Manasseh, who the Bible records later led Israel astray into greater evil than the nations, Canaanites, that God destroyed. He who put so many innocent people to death that he filled Jerusalem with blood from end to end. Yeah, and he was king for like over 50 years. Well, he repented towards the end, so that's good, but unfortunately the damage was done. And it ultimately brought about God's judgment against Judah. I mean, that was like the final straw. And God was going to be sending the Babylonians. And the Bible is clear. Biology is not destiny. One can be a daughter of a murderous pharaoh and be a moral hero. And one can be the grandson of a corrupt and idolatrous king and lead the Jewish people into a religious and ethical revival. Yeah, well, sadly it didn't last, though. Yeah, because sadly Josiah's son, his sons were bad. But he was a good king. All right, do not oppress the most vulnerable. 17. You shall not subvert the rights of the stranger or the fatherless. You shall not take a widow's garment in pawn. And this verse covers three particularly vulnerable groups. 1. The non-Israelite living in Israel. Again, the Israelite is commended to treat the stranger, the non-Israelite living within the borders of Israel and living according to the laws of the land, as decently as he would an Israelite. 2. The fatherless. As the individual has no father to provide protection, he or she is particularly vulnerable. And 3. The widow. Widows were always understood to be particularly vulnerable, economically and otherwise. 18. Remember that you were a slave in Egypt, that the Lord your God redeemed you from there. Therefore do I enjoin you to observe this commandment. Given their experience of suffering, the Israelites are commanded to empathize with others. Empathy is the best guard against cruelty. It is well nigh impossible to deliberately inflict pain on someone whose pain we can empathize with. 19. When you reap the harvest in your field and overlook a sheaf in the field, do not turn back to get it. It shall go to the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, in order that the Lord your God may bless you in all your undertakings. And this is a particularly touching law. When reaping one's harvest, one may not turn back to retrieve a sheaf inadvertently left behind. It must be left for those who need it more, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. 20. When you beat down the fruit of your olive trees, do not go over them again. That shall go to the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. 21. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, do not pick it over again. That shall go to the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. Law after law in the Torah directs the Israelite people to help the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. If, in gathering one's produce, the owner misses some of it on his first pass, he is to leave it for these vulnerable groups. It is the abundance of Torah laws such as these that enables me to make peace with the handful of morally difficult passages and laws in the Torah. And I would say stuff like this is real social justice, not the social justice that the left talks about. And stopping systemic racism and police brutality and white supremacy. No, not that. No, this is actually real social justice, helping the needy. Yeah, but you are supposed to show biblical justice, properly. Yeah, don't favor the needy over the rich or vice versa. Yeah, if they did the crime and they're found guilty, they should do the time regardless of who they are. Yep. All right, and 22. Always remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, therefore do I enjoin you to observe this commandment. And the Israelites are commanded to repeatedly look after those who cannot help themselves. Nothing is as likely to ensure such behavior as remembering how they were mistreated in Egypt, when where they were deprived of dignity and subjected to cruelty. Hence, the overarching theme of this chapter is the dignity of the individual, which the Torah seeks to safeguard through its laws governing divorce, marriage, financial transactions, and treatment of workers and society's most vulnerable, among other matters. It is helpful to remember these laws when confronted by non-religious and sometimes anti-religious people who think that the 3,000-year-old Bible is outdated, primitive, and morally unnecessary. Yep. And Jesus was the ultimate one who fulfilled these, who cared for the broken. But all of us are needy and broken. All of us are like the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. We're left destitute for our sins, but Jesus comes to save us and give us eternal life if we believe. Yep, amen and amen. Good news. And may God bless you, and Lord willing, we'll get to Deuteronomy 25 next time. God bless you, and may the grace and mercy won by Jesus Christ and the fellowship of His Holy Spirit be with you all.